Hi, my name is Kasey Edwards, and this is my latest book, 30-something and the Clock is Ticking. What happens when you can no longer ignore the baby question? I'm going to read you the introduction. Have you ever seriously thought about whether or not you want to have a baby? Have you wondered what it would mean to you? To your career, your body, your relationships, your identity, your mental health? I'm not talking about when your period was late, after you ended up in bed with Mr. Oh-so-right, but only for the night. Or about those neurotic moments when you contemplated sticking holes in the condom because the love of your life, or so he seemed at the time, wouldn't marry you. I'm not even referring to that fantasy of getting knocked up so you could legitimately quit your job and opt out of the workforce for a while. I'm talking about that moment when your fertility train is chugging out of the station and you've got 1 foot aboard and 1 foot stubbornly planted on the platform. I have. For a long time, my views about babies were firmly set. In my teens and 20s, I was anti-kids. I was one of those feminists who arrogantly believed I was meant for far greater things than just being a breeder. I couldn't reconcile the inequality of motherhood. Why should the woman have to carry the baby for 9 months? Why should she have to endure childbirth, get saggy boobs from breastfeeding, sacrifice her career, identity, and pelvic floor muscles, when all the man has to do is come? I didn't consider motherhood any sort of accomplishment because, after all, anyone could do it. It didn't matter how hard you worked, how hard you studied, or what the title was on your business card. Anyone who could get a man to sleep with them could have a baby. And let's face it, that's hardly an achievement. As my 30s approached, I softened my stance somewhat. Other people's babies started to look quite cute, so long as I didn't have to touch them. I used to hate it when people would thrust their babies into my lap, and I'd sit there tensely trying not to break it, wondering how long social etiquette dictated I had to hold it before I could give it back without causing offence. All the time I was secretly thinking that they should hold their own bloody baby. It frustrated me that babies were so useless. I mean, babies can't do anything for themselves. And until they understand object permanence and the relationship between cause and effect, it's impossible to relate to them. And then the certainty that I never wanted a baby, which had been the landmark of my youth, began to erode, if ever so slightly. I figured this was no big deal. I was only 32 years old, which left plenty of time to make up my mind about the baby question. I didn't need to think about babies until the day when the urge to have a baby was greater than the urge not to. And if the urge to procreate never came, then so be it. I would be happily childless and embrace my independence, disposable income, and a belly without stretch marks. Imagine my surprise when one day I'm talking to my boyfriend Chris and the words, "I want to have a baby," vomit out of my mouth. It was like they were sent directly from my ovaries to my mouth and bypassed my brain. I'll be sure to be less judgmental next time I accuse a man of thinking with his dick. What was I thinking? I'd known Chris for less than a year. Sure, we were serious and had recently begun living together, but that conversation was still far off in some distant future. And the timing was terrible. Our apartment was a shoebox, far too small to fit a baby and all that brightly coloured plastic stuff that babies seem to attract. And our savings were even tinier. I quickly retracted the statement and agreed with Chris that we would discuss the baby subject again in a year, and not a moment sooner. Less than 2 weeks later, after a visit to my gynecologist, we could talk of nothing else. My fertility train had started its engine and the conductor had shouted, "All aboard!" I was too young to deal with this. Crunch time had come, by my estimation, about 10 years ahead of schedule. In the months that followed, I was forced to contemplate all those baby questions that used to bore me to tears when I was stuck at the clucky end of the table at a dinner party. What would it mean to want a baby but be unable to have one? Would it leave a void that I could never fill with a couple of fluffy white mutts and designer handbags? Or what would it be like if I did have a baby, only to discover that I didn't want it, that I preferred my life before? I'd be stuck with a baby forever, unable to give it back. Would my life be ruined? Faced with the biggest decision of my life, I decided to do some researching and some soul searching to help me decide. I wanted to uncover the truth about motherhood without the sugar coating. I wanted to know about all the things people don't talk about because it's socially awkward to do so, or they'd just prefer to forget. I wanted to know definitively and ahead of time if my life would be better or worse if I had a child. What would I be giving up? What would I be gaining? And what would I regret? I spoke to people who had children and people who didn't. People who were infertile and never had the luxury of choosing. And people who had all the right plumbing but no ready access to sperm. Along the way, I discovered how the desire for a baby can drive people to the brink of insanity and perhaps over the edge. The logistical challenges presented when ovulating and trying to conceive on a long-haul flight. For the first time, I appreciated the huge achievement membership to the Mile High Club really is, given the size of aeroplane toilets. The indignity and the despair of IVF, and the price of buying sperm on the internet. Most of all, I found that at some point, every woman has to confront the baby question. For some women, it's fleeting and the answer is obvious. For others, the question creeps up slowly and the answer is heart-wrenchingly painful. There is no single right answer, but what I did discover is that regardless of the answer, it's a lot better to face the baby question head-on and on your own terms, rather than letting time, ignorance, and social pressures make the decision for us. This is my story and the stories of other women about what we decided, what we were unable to decide, and how we dealt with the consequences. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope you enjoy 30-something and the clock is ticking as much as I enjoyed researching and writing it.